have been in.
So that is a very disturbing and powerful piece of evidence, Muckle. What does the government have to say about all this?
Well, we spoke to the Department for Work and Pensions. They say they're consulting on reform, and they admit that it's not right that a benefit set up to improve lives could be having the opposite impact. OK,
well, let's get a word with Dave TRAXSON. Dave is a senior educational psychologist from the West Midlands who believes that these drugs are sometimes misprescribed, and Professor Chris HOLLIS of Nottingham University and Queen's Medical Centre, a practising child psychiatrist who helped to draft the current NICE guidelines. Good evening to you, Professor HOLLIS. How are you?
Good evening, Adrian.
Yeah, what are the dangers of children taking drugs to treat ADHD who don't actually have the condition?
Well, I think we need to put this into context, because the evidence actually that the condition is overdiagnosed and children are inappropriately receiving the medication is really very thin indeed. In fact,
well, I have to say it's quite powerful, both from the head teachers that we've spoken to in the preparation of this programme, and indeed I have to say from the vast number of texts and emails that we've received to the programme today supporting our story.
Right. I'm really drawing on evidence of large-scale research studies carried out over the last 5 years in the UK, looking at the diagnosis and the accuracy of diagnosis of ADHD, which is when the NICE guidelines are applied and diagnosis is made carefully and systematically, particularly including input from teachers and schools into that process, then it's extremely accurate. And the issue is perhaps more one of underdiagnosis than overdiagnosis.
Well, you're talking about research, long-term study. I mean, this could just be the latest scam that people have got word of. I noticed that in just 2 years, between 2007 and 2009, the number of prescriptions for 16 to 18-year-olds for these kind of drugs, for that group alone, rose by 51%. How do you account for that?
Well, the issue there, Adrian, is that not majority of those young people had a diagnosis but were either dropping out of treatment or were not being treated. The recognition of ADHD persisting into young adult life has really only been made in the last 5 to 10 years. And
Muckle's got a point here. Go on, Muckle.
Professor Hollis, could it be that what might be happening is that because of the lack of communication between teachers and because of the way the system is, the wrong people are being diagnosed, that some people may not be being diagnosed, but yet the wrong people may be being diagnosed?
Well, this is certainly a possibility, but I can only draw on the evidence that we have rather than just a few anecdotal reports.
Yeah, well, I'd like you to reflect on the
that I think
the evidence that we have, Professor Hollis. We'll come back to you in a moment, and we'll talk about those NICE guidelines that you've mentioned. I want to bring in Dave TRAXSON, who, as I say, is a senior educational psychologist in the West Midlands. Dave, from the evidence that we have, it seems that parents are desperate to get their children, in some cases, diagnosed as ADHD.
Well, I'm certainly reassured by the responses you've had to your programme, and that fits nicely with the information I get from colleagues all over the West Midlands. And those colleagues are psychologists, head teachers, social workers, and that fits very nicely with that picture. And one of the problems with Dr. Hollis's argument is the point about triangulation of data, that there are 3 sides to a triangle: the doctor, the parent and the school. And in over half the cases, we reckon, in the West Midlands, when we do surveys on this, the school is not contacted, so they do not have a checklist to fill in. So Professor Stephen Rose, the eminent professor, argues that these assessments are too reliant on one side, which is the parent information.
Well, we'll come back to that very shortly. I think you're making a very important point there, Dave. But are you saying then that the evidence that we've compiled suggesting that parents are keen sometimes to get their children prescribed very powerful drugs in order to claim benefits, in your view, that is justified?
I mean, I don't want to get into the blame game for parents, because there are some very disadvantaged parents that claim benefits, and sometimes they are very correctly provided. When I do straw polls with my colleagues around the West Midlands, the figure that we come up with consistently is that in about 20% of the prescriptions, we accept that those are valid and accurate diagnoses of ADHD because they've used all three sides of the data. But in the other 80%, a lot of my colleagues all over the country, not just the West Midlands, because I've spoken at 2 national conferences recently, colleagues all over the country have major concerns about the appropriateness, especially in relation to the use of some very questionable checklists.
OK, well, we'll get Professor Hollis to comment on that before too long. Dave TRAXSON and Professor Hollis, thank you both very much indeed. And, of course, here on 5 Live Investigates, as always, we're keen to hear about your experiences of ADHD. Are doctors too willing to prescribe mood-altering drugs to children? Or are parents who try to help their offspring being unfairly stigmatised?
5 Live Investigates
with Adrian Goldberg.
Tonight on 5 Live Investigates, claims that youngsters who are simply badly behaved are being diagnosed with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, ADHD, and being put on powerful stimulant drugs. Many children with the complaint do benefit from treatments like Ritalin, but we're hearing allegations on the show from 2 head teachers who say that some parents push doctors into giving medication even when it's not suitable, sometimes to help them get benefits. There have also been claims that doctors are too willing to do a tick-box examination of the children instead of checking properly with the school whether their behaviour can be properly classed as ADHD. Your responses have been coming in, and our reporter Mukul Devachand has been sifting through the texts and emails, as well as your tweets and your Facebook responses. And there have, Mukul, been loads.
There have. There's been an epic response, really, Adrian. One woman in London, we won't use her name, she says, "Unfortunately, I have to agree with these suspicions. I have a family member with 2 children who've been diagnosed with a myriad of disorders, including ADHD. As far as I and other family members can see, there's nothing wrong with these children. They behave perfectly normally around us, but where the mother is claiming every benefit available to her because of this diagnosis." P says, "I know personally of a mother who wants to play the system to claim extra benefits. She would feed her primary school aged son chocolate, sweets and fizzy drinks before assessments to create hyperactive, distorted behaviour." I don't know if that would get past the doctors. But
no, well, Peter says, "I'm a sufferer of ADHD, and what these head teachers have to say on the matter is completely insulting to people such as me. These head teachers have no medical or psychological training, and yet they see fit to judge if a person is lying about a severe condition." An anonymous emailer says, "My son was diagnosed with ADHD by a psychiatrist. He now takes medication but has been refused disability living allowance because he is, quote, of above average intelligence, despite his behaviour at home being destructive and violent. I do not doubt that what the head teachers say is true, though. I am also a teacher and know of one child in receipt of benefits who sold his Ritalin for even more money, but the blame lies with the government as well as the parents." And Muckley, I'm intrigued. Where are the doctors in all this? I mean, even if parents are pushy, surely it's the doctors who have the final say.
Of course they do, Adrian. But there's evidence that in some cases doctors aren't quite following the recommendations in the clinical guidelines that Professor Chris Hollis mentioned earlier. According to those guidelines, doctors are supposed to check whether a child displays symptoms of ADHD in more than one setting. So perhaps not just at home with the parents, but in the school as well. The head teacher of one primary school I spoke to said 2 or 3 children each year in her school are now medicated without doctors checking the kids' behaviour with the teachers first.
Parents will go to their GPs, who then refer them on to a paediatrician. They will have any time from 20 minutes to an hour with the paediatrician to tell them all about what their child is doing at home, and then a drug is prescribed with no consultation with the schools. So we just feel that the paediatrician is not getting a full picture of that child in all its settings.
Do paediatricians check with you before prescribing these drugs?
Not in every case, no. I worked with another authority where it worked very well. The doctors would ask teachers to monitor a child in class, whether they showed signs of settling down, whether concentration was poor, whether social interaction had improved, whether their diet had changed, and whether they'd become more lethargic. And then there was a meeting to discuss with the parent whether the drug that was being used was the right one for the child. But this hasn't been the case with the doctors in this authority. So no, we don't have any correspondence. We have to chase it up with the paediatricians here.
So in a sense, she's backing up what Dave TRAXSON said to us earlier on, that some authorities and doctors don't do the proper checks.
Yes, that's right. But to be clear, she's saying that it varies from area to area and also from doctor to doctor. I've been told that some doctors do check as well, but they just send a general form for teachers to fill out, which is the same for ADHD or other behavioural disorders as it is for physical conditions like